In the state of Washington, at the foot of the majestic Mount Rainier, lived Calvin and Diana Hawthorne, a couple whose lives had long revolved around mountaineering. Calvin Hawthorne, born on March 15, 1978 in Seattle, was an experienced climber with dozens of successful ascents under his belt. His reputation in the climbing community was well established, having conquered peaks across North America and Europe. Diana Hawthorne, née Anderson, born on September 22, 1980 in Portland, Oregon, had been Calvin's climbing partner and wife for over a decade. She had accompanied him on numerous expeditions, until a severe knee injury in 2019 forced her to remain grounded. Despite this setback, Diana continued to support Calvin's passion for summits, managing their gear rental business, Summit Seekers, which they had established in 2015 in the town of Ashford, Washington. In May 2023, Calvin began preparations for another ascent of Mount Rainier, a climb he had completed multiple times before. This time, he invited several participants to join him, including a young climber named Selena Ramirez. Selena, born on July 7, 1995 in San Diego, California, had recently moved to Washington to pursue her passion for mountaineering. She quickly gained Calvin's trust and became a frequent climbing companion. The group consisted of 5 members: Calvin, Selena, and 3 other experienced climbers: Jack Thompson, a 35-year-old software engineer from Seattle; Maria Chen, a 29-year-old environmental scientist from Vancouver, Washington; and Brian Foster, a 42-year-old high school teacher from Tacoma. As the weeks passed, Diana began to notice changes in Calvin's behavior. He spent increasingly more time with Selena, often under the pretext of planning the upcoming Rainier expedition. Their meetings became more frequent, and phone calls lasted longer than usual. Calvin would leave early in the morning for what he called training sessions, and return late in the evening, looking energized and distracted. Diana's concern grew as she observed the subtle shifts in her husband's demeanor. He seemed more distant at home, often lost in thought or quickly changing the subject when she inquired about his day. The couple's usual evening routines of discussing climbing strategies and reviewing gear lists had become less frequent. On June 10, 2023, during a group meeting at their home to finalize the expedition details, Diana couldn't help but notice the easy familiarity between Calvin and Selena. Their shared laughter and inside jokes, the way they finished each other's sentences when discussing route options, all added to Diana's unease. However, Diana was not yet ready to confront her suspicions. She tried to rationalize Calvin's behavior, attributing it to the excitement of an upcoming challenging climb. After all, their marriage had weathered many storms, both literal and figurative, over the years. She told herself that the bond forged through their shared passion for mountaineering was stronger than any temporary infatuation. As the date of the expedition drew nearer, Diana's anxiety intensified. She found herself second-guessing every interaction between Calvin and Selena, searching for concrete evidence of infidelity. Yet, she remained uncertain whether her suspicions about her husband's unfaithfulness were justified, or merely a product of her own insecurities stemming from her inability to join him on climbs anymore. Calvin, once punctual and communicative, now frequently stayed out late, often leaving for meetings without offering explanations. His phone buzzed constantly with messages, which he was quick to hide from Diana's view. Diana decided to investigate further. When Calvin mentioned he was heading out for a group training session, Diana made a mental note. Later that day, she drove past the local climbing gym, Vertical Ventures, where these sessions usually took place. Calvin's red 2020 Ford F-150 was nowhere to be seen in the parking lot. Feeling a mix of anxiety and determination, Diana expanded her search. She drove through Ashford, checking Calvin's usual haunts. She spotted his truck parked outside the Climbing Goat Cafe on Mount Rainier Highway. Diana's heart raced as she pulled into a spot across the street, out of direct view. From her vantage point, Diana could see clearly into the cafe's large front window. There sat Calvin and Selena Ramirez, huddled close in a corner booth. They were laughing, their faces animated in conversation. Diana watched, her knuckles white on the steering wheel as Calvin reached across the table and touched Selena's hand. The gesture was brief but unmistakably intimate. For several agonizing minutes, Diana observed their interaction. She saw how Selena leaned in when Calvin spoke, how their eyes remained locked on each other, how their bodies seemed to gravitate closer despite the table between them. It was a dance of subtle movements that spoke volumes about their relationship, one that clearly extended beyond mere friendship or professional camaraderie. Unable to bear the sight any longer, Diana drove home, her mind reeling. She arrived at their house on Kernahan Road, barely remembering the drive. As she sat in her parked car, tears finally came, a mixture of anger, betrayal, and deep sadness. Calvin returned home later that evening, greeting Diana with a quick kiss on the cheek before heading to the shower. When asked about his day, he gave vague responses about productive training and finalizing expedition details. Diana, her voice carefully controlled, inquired if the whole group had been present. Calvin hesitated for a split second before affirming that everyone had attended, inadvertently confirming Diana's suspicions about his dishonesty. Over the next week, Diana found herself hyper-aware of Calvin's actions. She noticed how he angled his body away when texting, the slight smile that appeared when certain messages came through. She overheard fragments of hushed phone conversations, catching Selena's name more than once. Diana accessed their shared cell phone account. The call and text logs revealed a pattern: frequent, lengthy communications with Selena's number, often late at night or early in the morning. Some calls lasted over an hour, far longer than necessary for discussing climbing logistics. Despite the mounting evidence, Diana struggled to fully accept the reality of Calvin's infidelity. They had built a life together, shared dreams, and faced challenges side by side. The thought of Calvin betraying their vows seemed inconceivable. Diana found herself making excuses for his behavior, clinging to the hope that she was misinterpreting the situation. By June 30th, 2023, the day before the expedition was set to begin, Diana had lost weight and was struggling with insomnia. As she helped Calvin pack his gear, her hands shook slightly, her mind racing with unanswered questions and suppressed accusations. The impending climb loomed not just as a physical challenge for Calvin, but as a potential turning point in their marriage. Diana knew she needed concrete proof before confronting Calvin. On July 1st, 2023, the day of the Mount Rainier expedition, Diana Hawthorne's world came crashing down. While Calvin was preparing for the climb, his phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter, lit up with a message. Diana, standing nearby, couldn't help but see the notification. It was from Selena Ramirez. The message preview read, "Can't wait to be alone with you at the summit." Diana's hands trembled as she picked up Calvin's phone. She hesitated for a moment, her moral compass wavering, before unlocking it with the passcode she knew by heart. The full message appeared. "So excited for today. Can't wait to be alone with you at the summit. Our special moment. Don't forget the surprise for after. Love you." The confirmation of her husband's infidelity hit Diana like a physical blow. She quickly replaced the phone, her mind reeling. Calvin emerged from the shower, oblivious to the storm brewing inside his wife. As Calvin busied himself with last-minute preparations, Diana made a decision. She needed more evidence, something concrete to confront Calvin with upon his return. She drove to the Mount Rainier National Park entrance, where the climbing group was assembling. Diana arrived at the Paradise Visitor Center parking lot, where she found the team's vehicles. Under the pretense of delivering some forgotten gear, she approached the group. Calvin introduced her to everyone, including Selena, whose smile seemed forced and uncomfortable. While the team was distracted with equipment checks, Diana noticed Selena's backpack left unattended near her car. Seizing a moment when no one was looking, Diana quickly unzipped a side pocket of Selena's bag. Inside, she found a folder containing printed documents. With shaking hands, she leafed through the papers. There were detailed climbing routes for Mount Rainier, which seemed innocent enough. However, mixed in with these were reservation confirmations for a cabin on Lake Chelan, dated for the weekend immediately following the Rainier climb. The booking was for 2 adults, under the names Calvin Hawthorne and Selena Ramirez. Further documents revealed flight tickets to Hawaii, scheduled for August 15th, 2023. Again booked for Calvin and Selena. A printout of a real estate listing for a house in Maui was also included, with handwritten notes about mortgage options. Diana's blood ran cold as the full extent of Calvin's betrayal became clear. This wasn't just an affair. It was a meticulously planned exit strategy. Calvin wasn't just cheating on her. He was preparing to leave her for a new life with Selena. Diana hastily replaced the documents and zipped up the bag, her mind in turmoil. She made her excuses to the group and left, driving home in a daze. The drive back to Ashford was a blur, her thoughts consumed by what she had discovered. Back at home, Diana sat at their dining table, the same one where she and Calvin had planned countless adventures together. Now it felt like a monument to their crumbling marriage. The reality of Calvin's betrayal sank in, transforming her initial shock and pain into a cold, calculated anger. Diana's thoughts raced. She couldn't let Calvin and Selena simply walk away into their new life together. The years she had dedicated to supporting Calvin's climbing career, the dreams they had built together, the business they ran, all of it was being discarded for a younger woman and a fresh start. As the afternoon wore on, a plan began to form in Diana's mind. She knew the Rainier climb inside out, having been on it multiple times with Calvin. She was familiar with the gear, the route, and most importantly, the risks. Diana had formulated a strategy that would ensure Calvin and Selena would never enjoy their planned future together. Diana spent the rest of the day in a frenzy of activity. She visited their gear shop, Summit Seekers, collecting specific items she would need. To any observer, it would have looked like routine business, but each piece of equipment Diana selected had a sinister purpose in her emerging plan. By nightfall, Diana had everything prepared. She sat in their living room, surrounded by climbing gear, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop, as she studied weather reports and topographical maps of Mount Rainier. The woman who had always been Calvin's supportive partner was gone, replaced by someone driven by a cold, implacable desire for vengeance. Diana finalized the details of her plan. She would join the expedition, uninvited, and ensure that neither Calvin nor Selena would return from the mountain. The risks of high-altitude climbing would provide the perfect cover for what she intended to do. Diana went to bed, not to sleep, but to lie awake, rehearsing every step of her plan. On July 2nd, 2023, the climbing group, consisting of Calvin Hawthorne, Selena Ramirez, Jack Thompson, Maria Chen, and Brian Foster, began their ascent of Mount Rainier. The team was unaware that Diana Hawthorne had decided to join them, arriving at the Paradise Visitor Center just as they were about to depart. Calvin was visibly surprised by Diana's unexpected appearance, but quickly composed himself, introducing her to the group as an experienced climber who would be a valuable addition to the team. Diana explained her last-minute decision to join as a desire to overcome her injury-induced fear of climbing. The group welcomed her, unaware of the turmoil and dangerous intentions brewing beneath her calm exterior. As they began their climb, Diana keenly observed the interactions between Calvin and Selena. Their shared glances, subtle touches, and private conversations only served to fuel Diana's rage, which she carefully concealed behind a mask of friendly enthusiasm. The group made steady progress, reaching Camp Muir at 10,188 feet by late afternoon. During the evening meal, Diana maintained her facade, engaging in climbing stories and route discussions. Internally, she was meticulously noting the group's gear placement and individual routines, essential details for her plan. July 3rd dawned with ominous weather signs. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind picked up strength. Despite the worsening conditions, Calvin, as the lead climber, decided to push on towards the summit. Diana knew that the deteriorating weather played perfectly into her scheme. As they climbed higher, the temperature dropped dramatically, and visibility decreased. The group roped up, with Calvin leading, followed by Selena, Jack, Maria, Brian, and Diana at the rear. The formation gave Diana the perfect vantage point to observe, without being closely watched herself. At around 12,000 feet, the first signs of altitude sickness began to affect some team members. Maria complained of a severe headache, while Brian struggled with nausea. Calvin called for more frequent breaks, allowing Diana to subtly examine the group's equipment during these pauses. By mid-afternoon, as they approached the disappointment cleaver at 12,300 feet, the weather had deteriorated significantly. Gusts of wind threatened to knock the climbers off balance, and snow reduced visibility to mere feet. Calvin, showing signs of concern, gathered the group to discuss whether to continue or turn back. During this crucial moment, Diana noticed Selina discreetly squeeze Calvin's hand, a gesture of support that only heightened Diana's determination. She vocally supported pushing forward, citing their extensive preparation and the group's experience. Her encouragement swayed the decision, and they pressed on into the worsening storm. By nightfall, they reached the high camp at 14,000 feet. The wind howled around their tents as they set up camp in near whiteout conditions. Exhausted, the climbers quickly retreated into their shelters. Diana volunteered for the first watch, claiming her restlessness would make sleep impossible. As the others slept, Diana sat at the entrance of her tent, the harsh wind masking any sounds of her movement. She surveyed the camp, her eyes lingering on the tent shared by Calvin and Selina. The storm raged on, providing the perfect cover for what she was about to do. With practiced hands, Diana began to make subtle alterations to key pieces of climbing equipment. A slight loosening here, a minor adjustment there, changes that would go unnoticed in casual inspection, but could prove catastrophic under the stress of the final ascent. As the night wore on, Diana's face remained impassive, betraying none of the tumultuous emotions within. She knew that the next day's climb to the summit would be the most challenging and dangerous part of their journey. It would also be her opportunity to enact her revenge. As July 4, 2023, turned to darkness, the climbers at high camp on Mount Rainier settled into an uneasy sleep, exhausted from their arduous ascent and battered by the relentless storm. Diana Hawthorne, consumed by her plan for revenge, waited patiently for the perfect moment to act. At approximately 2 a.m. on July 5th, with the wind howling and visibility near zero, Diana emerged from her tent. Moving with stealth honed from years of mountaineering, she began systematically gathering crucial supplies from around the camp. She collected all the remaining food rations, water purification tablets, and emergency medical kits. Diana also took key pieces of climbing equipment, spare ropes, ice axes, and crampons. At 3:15 a.m., with her backpack laden with the group's survival essentials, Diana began her descent from high camp. The storm provided perfect cover for her departure, the sound of her footsteps lost in the howling wind. As she navigated the treacherous path downward, Diana's face remained impassive, her movements mechanical, driven by a cold determination for vengeance. Back at the camp, the remaining climbers slept on, unaware of the perilous situation Diana had engineered for them. Calvin and Selina, sharing a tent, were particularly vulnerable, their supplies now critically depleted. As dawn broke on July 5th, around 5:30 a.m., the storm began to subside, revealing a deceptively beautiful alpine morning. Calvin was the first to emerge from his tent, intending to assess the weather conditions for their final push to the summit. It was then that he noticed the eerie quiet of the camp and the conspicuous absence of Diana's tent. By 6 a.m., as the rest of the group awakened, the full extent of their predicament became clear. Panic set in as they discovered the missing supplies and equipment. Calvin, realizing the gravity of the situation, attempted to use the satellite phone to call for rescue, only to find it missing. Another calculated move by Diana. With their resources severely depleted and no means of communication, the group faced a grim choice. Attempt a perilous descent with inadequate equipment, or try to wait for rescue in the harsh alpine environment. Calvin, feeling responsible as the lead climber, made the fateful decision to attempt the descent. As they began their desperate journey down the mountain, the lack of proper equipment and supplies quickly took its toll. The group's progress was painfully slow, hindered by exhaustion, dehydration, and the treacherous terrain. By midday, signs of severe altitude sickness began to manifest in several members, exacerbated by the lack of medical supplies and proper nutrition. Calvin, pushing himself to the limit to find a safe route, made a critical error in judgment. Attempting to navigate a particularly hazardous section, he lost his footing on an icy ledge. In a heart-stopping moment, Calvin plummeted down the slope, disappearing into a crevasse. Selina, witnessing Calvin's fall, attempted a rescue but was held back by the other climbers, aware that without proper equipment, any rescue attempt would likely result in more casualties. The group, now leaderless and in shock, huddled together, realizing that their chances of survival were dwindling by the hour. As night fell on July 5th, the remaining climbers, including Selina, found themselves trapped on the mountain, their hopes for rescue fading. Calvin's body remained unreachable in the depths of the crevasse, a grim testament to the consequences of Diana's vengeful actions. Miles below, Diana had reached the safety of the lower slopes, her face still set in a mask of cold determination. In the aftermath of the Mount Rainier tragedy, search and rescue teams combed the treacherous slopes, eventually recovering the bodies of Calvin Hawthorne and Selena Ramirez. The grim discovery sent shockwaves through the tight-knit climbing community and beyond. Diana Hawthorne returned home, maintaining a facade of ignorance about the fate that had befallen her husband and his lover. She played the role of the grieving widow, expressing shock and devastation at the news of Calvin's death. However, her performance didn't fool everyone for long. As days passed, inconsistencies in Diana's story began to surface. The police, initially treating the incident as a tragic climbing accident, started to notice peculiarities that didn't add up. The mysterious disappearance of crucial supplies, Diana's unexpected join to the expedition, and her subsequent return raised red flags. Detective Sarah Larson, lead investigator on the case, began to piece together the puzzle. She noted Diana's calm demeanor during initial questioning, a stark contrast to the typical behavior of someone who had just lost their spouse. Furthermore, Diana's alibi for her descent from the mountain didn't match the timeline established by other climbers they encountered on the route. The breakthrough came when forensic analysis of the climbing gear revealed tampering. Microscopic examinations showed intentional weakening of critical equipment, pointing to sabotage rather than wear and tear. This evidence, combined with eyewitness accounts of Diana's unusual behavior before and after the climb, led to her arrest on suspicion of murder. Under intense interrogation, Diana's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. Detective Larson, employing a mix of empathy and relentless questioning, finally broke through Diana's defenses. In a moment of emotional collapse, Diana confessed to her actions, revealing the full extent of her plan for revenge. The trial of Diana Hawthorne became a media sensation, captivating the nation with its tale of betrayal, jealousy, and calculated vengeance. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Reeves, presented a meticulous case. They detailed Diana's discovery of the affair, her careful planning, and the cold-blooded execution of her plan on the mountain. Evidence included Diana's internet search history, showing research on climbing accidents and survival rates on Mount Rainier. Financial records revealed her last-minute purchases of specific climbing gear used in her sabotage. The prosecution also called fellow climbers to testify about Diana's uncharacteristic insistence on pushing forward despite dangerous conditions. Diana's defense team, headed by renowned attorney Jessica Chen, attempted to paint a picture of a woman driven to temporary insanity by the betrayal of her husband. They argued that Diana's actions were a crime of passion, fueled by emotional distress and not indicative of her true character. Character witnesses were brought in to speak of Diana's previously impeccable reputation and contributions to the climbing community. However, the premeditated nature of the crime weighed heavily against these arguments. The jury was particularly moved by testimony from Maria Chen and Brian Foster, the surviving members of the climbing expedition. They recounted their harrowing experience on the mountain, and the moment they realized Calvin and Selena were beyond saving. After a 3-week trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom fell silent as Diana stood, her face a mask of resignation, to hear her sentence. Judge Robert Thornton, known for his no-nonsense approach, delivered a scathing indictment of Diana's actions before pronouncing the sentence. He spoke of the sanctity of trust among climbing partners and the broader betrayal to the mountaineering community. Judge Thornton sentenced Diana Hawthorne to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, to be served at the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California. As Diana was led away from the courtroom, the families of Calvin and Selena watched with a mix of grief and relief, their long journey for justice finally at an end. In the years that followed, Diana became a solitary figure in the prison community. She spent much of her time in the prison library, poring over books on mountaineering and nature, a bitter reminder of the life she had left behind. Some inmates, aware of her story, gave her a wide berth, while others were drawn to the notoriety of her case. As part of her sentence, Diana was required to attend regular therapy sessions. It was in these sessions that she began to confront the full weight of her actions. The therapist, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, worked tirelessly to help Diana understand the depth of her emotional trauma and the destructive path it had led her down.